My name's Luke Davies. I am a poet and novelist and screenwriter from Australia originally, living in LA. I think, maybe there was some childhood kind of moments in old bad sci-fi movies and so on, but about 20-something years ago, 20-ish years ago, I read that Neil Stephenson novel, Snow Crash. I first had the concept of moving in three-dimensional space in a so-called digital sense through vast landscapes, and I liked that. Except what's interesting is that in my memory of reading that novel, it was all black and white, because when I read that novel, the entire early world of laptops was still black and white. So it's funny that I made that transferal, and it was this vast, quite beautiful, the way he described it, these effectively information superhighways world, but it was black and white, and it was very pixelated and snowy. At a certain point, I started to realize that things were always changing rapidly, and that I was now living in a period where I was old enough to straddle the divide between this analog world and this completely different world, but that I would experience some of it. And that hopefully I would embrace this future and not be an old fogey. Oh, let me just go back. So there was first Neil Stephenson. Later on, you asked the question of what has been my experience, or what were the origins of my experience with virtual reality. In the last 5 or 10 years, Nick Bostrom, the philosopher who writes very convincingly about why statistically it's very likely that we're living in a computer simulation. That means to me that my experience of virtual reality is possibly 24/7, that I'm in it and I'm experiencing it, and it's beautifully real. I can say that. But the thing with the Nick Bostrom for me is that at a certain point, about 3 years ago, I had an epiphany. I kept watching his YouTube clip. It's about 20 minutes long, where he explains the computer simulation theory. At a certain point, it popped, and I suddenly understood it, or felt that I understood it, and thought, oh my God, now I get it, and that's probably what's going on here. Now, what's interesting about that at a philosophical level is that it actually kind of goes back to, it's a kind of creationist theory, in the sense that it means that there's someone out there who created these programs. And I'm really, I had a health scare, and it's gone now, so I got like a reprieve, so to speak, and I love my life, and I would love to live to be really old. I'm not like these billionaires who like experiment with cryogenics or whatever, but I just figure if I live one day at a time while everyone else drops off, then eventually I'm going to be in the Guinness Book of Records as the oldest person on Earth. But when the Nick Bostrom theory kind of popped, and I thought to myself, oh, maybe there's a way of living longer. If I just think, since I'm just a computer code, if I just think to contact the people who designed the code, if I just let them know that I would really love to not die at the allotted programmed time, then maybe they'll listen. They're like, okay, this guy made the effort of like contacting us, so let's let him keep living. I'd love to live to be like 1,000,000 years old or something like that. I just said to my agents, listen, I don't know what's going to happen with this world, and it feels like we're at where we are frontiers people, but I'm really interested in finding out more about it. So if you have any clients who are doing anything at all to do with VR, I'm really interested in meeting them. And I'm represented by UTA, giant agency, 1 million writers, but apparently my request was really unusual. There are not a lot of traditional old school screenwriters out there represented by UTA who are saying, can I meet the VR people, please? So so that's how it started. My agents contacted the UTA VR agents and said, we got this client, he wants to meet VR people. And so then the VR people are completely welcoming, because a lot of them are either in a sort of producerial world, or sort of they have business heads as they try to get this stuff up and running, and of course the tech world. And so they're really happy if a person who's like I'm a story guy, supposedly, So they welcomed me with open arms, and that's when I started to take meetings and see things. The very first thing I ever saw was Chris Milk's, oh my God, Origin of Verse, which was a transcendental experience for me. Everything for me changed at that moment. That simple, beautiful 3-minute poem, you know? I had the experience, and I understood then what might be possible beyond that. I think that there are going to be ways of experiencing virtual reality in future that are in the realm of breath-based forms of meditation that can lead to a sense of a transcendent experience or an experience of the divine, and that might also cross over into a sort of hypnotherapy realm, as well as being in the realm of, like, you've seen that movie, the VR thing, Blue, where you're sitting on the deck of the wrecked ship and the big whale comes. It's kind of magnificent. But I would love to have an experience where that is more limitless and where the physical sensation of floating is complete. You know, right now I can feel this chair under my ass, and so that would be interesting, and that would be a form of meditation. How I feel and have felt about VR is incredibly excited. It seems to me, my guess is that it's 1895, and it's the Lumiere brothers, and it's go to the sideshow and put your nickel in the slot and look at this 10-second film, or sit in that theater and watch the train come towards you. Literally, we may not even be there yet. We may be at like 0.00001% of that. What's coming is going to be beyond. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I want to be able to experience the emotional experience that I have as a consumer of art, reading novels, reading poetry, in particular seeing films, the immersive experience of being in a great film and being lost. I want to experience that, and then there are all these incredibly complex questions about how do we move into that. First-person perspective, nausea, the claustrophobia of wearing these cumbersome things. How's the technology going to change? What's the future going to look like? How's AR going to leapfrog VR? And there's so many exciting questions, and I just want to be a guy there at the beginning, putting my hand up saying, can I enter these discussions, and can we talk about how emotional stories can begin to fit into this stuff? Because otherwise we're still at the sideshow level of, like, check out this gimmick, check out this experience. There's so many different things to talk about that question. One of them is the all-important question of point of view. Are you first person invisible? And if not, if you're really close to an actor, let's say we're trying to move into a world where famous actors, where people want to have the experience of watching fictional stories acted out by real actors. So if it's a world where you're close to that person, how does that work psychologically? Some people say that this is a fundamental problem. That means this stuff's not going to work out. I don't think that's true, because I think in 1890, 1895, 1905, that leap of looking at a flat screen and allowing yourself to accept the parameters of the game was such a massive leap that this other leap of possibly being 1 foot away at all times from this person and being able to turn away and see what's happening in the other places where the story is taking place is a kind of grammatical leap that we will learn to accept. Maybe not, I don't know. But I've seen now how VR can be harnessed well to a basic documentary style. Like, 60 minutes can work in a VR way with cuts. Cuts are not necessarily as big as a problem as people are saying in VR, because the grammar of cuts is now in our DNA since 120, 30 years ago. That heightened sense of emotional immediacy is very intriguing to me. And the idea, as you said, that we are writing the rules, that the frontier is so new that the writing rules are being written. I mean, so are the technology rules. The sense of exploration right now is so viscerally exciting, so intense and so immense. That's great. And in that, we writers come along saying, well, here's a pretty important thing. While you guys are busy working out the technology to create the amazing psychospatial experiences, let us get busy creating the kind of interior emotional through lines of how you might experience this stuff at its richest level, how you might take it beyond the sideshow thing. And I think the sense of emotional immediacy can be, even in documentary, that can be amazing. You know, I don't know if you've seen, I forget the guy's name, that's terrible, but there's a documentary about the Ebola virus and the teams that bury the Ebola bodies. They need to wear hazmat suits. There's all these, there's bodies in the, you know, in hazmat bags and so on. And it's just a documentary, but there's moments in that are incredible when you're like looking at this field full of graves that have been dug, where these bodies need to be buried because of the dangers of the disease being transmitted. And suddenly you turn and there's one of the hazmat workers there beside you. The emotional impact of that moment for me was really like, oh, holy shit, I am here, you know? And how will that move into, when we begin to create fictional narrative forms, actual stories that work, that you experience, that have a beginning, middle, and an end, and a sense that you were just immersed in a really good story. The potential for how intense that emotional connection can be because of the brand new spatial dynamics of VR is, it's huge, that potential, and it's incredibly exciting. Listen, I hope that if I have any one part of my identity that carries into my career as a screenwriter, it's myself as a poet, which is my essential identity. So in the Lion screenplay, for example, well, there's two things. One is that in writing that screenplay, the first half of that story has so little dialogue that I knew that I had to actually write it in a poetic way that would make the reader, you know, directors, actors, financiers, various people feel the poetic intensity of the story and go for the ride and want to be involved with this film. So hopefully, like, I used my skills to describe non-verbal scenes in a way that made you feel like you were very much there with this little 5-year-old boy lost in this vast, menacing landscape. And then the second thing was that I had to imagine that the blueprint that I was putting down on the page of the script would, in the hands of the right director, the right actors, the right director of photography, be poetic. The poetic intensity of Lion partly allows for the extraordinary, the improbable story to play out and become gripping. This incredibly improbable needle in a haystack story of a guy who finds his lost mother. So it's two things. One is that I'm trying to be poetic in the language of the screenplay, but in a not overdone, not overly florid way. And two is, in the screen in your brain that's happening when you read the screenplay, I'm trying to make it so that you can see the poetry of the story. Yes, so I have, I continue to take lots of meetings with people, talk about ideas, try and juggle my life, because there's, you know, it's not like there's a lot of make a living type money yet in the world of VR, but I don't care. It's like, so I'm trying to earn my money here, and I'm trying to let everybody know that I want to meet everybody who's doing anything. I want to keep just seeing the progression of the technology. But I've teamed up with this wonderful working pair of producers, producer-directors, Milica Zek and Winslow Porter, out of New York, or out of Serbia in her case, in Milica's case. And they did this film Giant, this really intense, interesting sort of 7-minute VR film, which partly comes out of Milica's experience as being a teenage girl in Serbia during the wars in the 90s. And it's about a little girl whose house is being bombed and whose parents die. It's pretty dark and distressing, but it's kind of an amazing experience. And then more recently, they did this film Tree, where you are a tree and you grow up out of the soil and your arms are the branches and the landscape, the scale changes. The sense of scale changing potential is a beautiful thing in VR. It's like that old Powers of 10 video from the 70s by the Ray Eames, the designer. So anyway, we're working on a thing at the moment. It's called Breathe, and it's the third part of that trilogy or triptych, whatever you call it, that involves the little girl whose basement was bombed in the first film, is a little girl beginning to grow up in the third film called Breathe, which we are now working on and exploring and going through the same glorious challenges. How do you get from this to this? How would you dissolve from that moment to that moment and make it feel like a narratively valid dissolve? How would the experience of moving around a space that we imagine the person with the VR headset has to be in, how do they know where to move? How much freedom of space do they have? What happens if they turn around? What happens to the scene that we want them to now leave? We want to prod them to move in a certain way and experience certain things. These challenges are beautiful, and it's this constant sense of genuine excitement in trying to solve them. And also for me, it's this amazing sense of like, we get together, we talk about this, this, and this, and they are so glass half full. VR people in general are. They're like, okay, we can't technically do that yet. We don't know how to do that. The thing that you're describing has never been done before. We don't know how to stitch that together in that way. We don't know how you can move that through that space in that way, but we're gonna keep trying, and we're gonna do it. We're gonna find a way of doing it. I feel that I won't live long enough to see a world in which the flat screen experience, the entertainment industry as it exists today, just no longer happens in that way. I mean, in a sense, small devices, streaming, yeah, whatever, we're sort of in that world, but I don't think that I will live long enough to bridge the gap into a realm where we are so immersed in our post-human futures that everything is actually there. I think now, and maybe for hundreds of years more, we're still in this bridging period we're still in that frontier period of put your nickel in the slot and look at the gimmicky sideshow kind of thing, comparatively speaking to what it will be like in the future. So you know, the answer to that question means, yeah, probably for the rest of my working life, which if the computer coders don't answer my question and let me live to 1,000,000 years old, it's probably not all that long. I'm probably going to still write screenplays and really enjoy doing that and get back to writing my novels and keep writing poetry. And so, yeah. I know that VR is not going to remain a tech gimmick. It's not only going to become something else, it's going to kind of become everything else in terms of the way that we consume not just entertainment, but information, and live our lives as participating units of that information. The thing I don't know is this 5, 7 years, how long is this all happening in? It's really clear that change is unbelievably rapid. It's really clear that the singularity is hurtling towards us at a certain rate. It's phenomenal when you think about it. 7, 8, 10,000 years ago, there were accountants beginning to work out little notation systems to keep track of the grain, and that became written language, and that became the earliest kind of forms of literature. Let's use Greek literature as an example because it's part of our Western kind of bones. And that there was a gap of a couple of thousand years before someone invented the printing press, the most phenomenal leap forward, you know. Those couple of thousand-year gaps are now taking place in 1 year or 5 years or 3 months, and the exponential rate of change is so great that it's quite dizzying in a really exciting way. But so I don't know, you know, it's coming, but I just hope I live to a ripe old age to experience all the glories of it.